On today's episode of Dwell on These Things, we're joined with Jennifer Taber, the program director of the Gracehaven Ministry in Central Ohio Youth for Christ, and Scott Arnold, the executive director of Central Ohio Youth for Christ. We're going to be talking about the Gracehaven Ministry and what it's doing in the city of Columbus. Be sure to follow if you're on Apple or Spotify, or subscribe if you're listening on YouTube so you'll never miss another episode. All right, here we go. Welcome to Dwell on These Things, a podcast by Dwell Community Church in Columbus, Ohio, where we hear stories and examples of how God is moving in the church at Dwell and around the world.
Hi, I'm Scott. I'm the Executive Director and Chief Bottle Washer at Youth for Christ here in Columbus.
Hi, I'm Jen Taber, and I'm the Director of Programming at Gracehaven. Gracehaven is a ministry that serves youth who've been sexually exploited or trafficked in Central Ohio, as well as throughout the state of Ohio.
Yeah, I would chime in. I think we want to bring the gospel. We want to bring hands of service and love to kids that have been exploited. There's a lot of them, and unfortunately, due to the nature of this kind of challenge in our society, there's a lot of people who raise a lot of awareness for this, but there's not a lot of people who roll up their sleeves and dig in and actually serve kids in this space. So that's our goal, is to honor God by doing that. So yeah, Gracehaven began more as a work and a vision from a guy named Dr. Jeff Barrows back in 2004. He came across this issue, and frankly, it's an interesting twist in the journey of our society. We used to think about girls that we would call them prostitutes, but girls that were prostituting themselves as the criminals. They were the ones out stirring up problems in society. And it took way too long before someone looked across the table at a 12-year-old girl and thought to themselves, I wonder what caused her to want to be involved in prostituting herself. And when that question was asked, it became obvious instantly, well, she didn't. This is a young person that's been pulled into something that's above her pay grade. She's being used and exploited by others who are far older than her. And that's when the whole concept, at least in our society, that human trafficking is something right here happening in our society, was born. And so Jeff caught that message. It was a fairly early on in Central Ohio leader, pioneer in that space. And Jeff wanted to do something. And so he began to talk with law enforcement and others, asking, what is it that we need the most to serve in this space? And the answer was a residential home for minors. And so with that as a vision, they launched Gracehaven, incorporated in 2008. So Bev Delashman, if you know that name, was the original board chair. So I'm not exactly sure how Jeff roped Bev into this, but Bev got on board and became a real champion of this space as well, as did a number of other members here at Dwell, people who are still involved as either donors or board members or in other ways. So it's been a movement both inside and outside of Dwell to serve in this space. And so in 2014, we brought Gracehaven under the umbrella of YFC, and it's been there ever since. So that's how we get from there to here.
It was years ago that the Lord intervened in my own life, and actually through several women who were ministering to me while I was in college, studying social work. And I got into doing that because I was seeing this in my own hometown. My friends were experiencing it. I was experiencing it. We didn't call it trafficking then. We're actually called a lot of negative things like, runaway, throwaway kid, drug addict, all those kinds of things. And it wasn't really recognized as these were children who are victims of exploitation, and they needed protection, support, those kinds of things. That just didn't exist in the community that I grew up in. So I wanted to go to school and study enough to learn how to intervene, and that's what I knew to do at that point. So I tried education, and there is where Christ met me, and from there he changed my life, my perspective, and Gracehaven is something that he kept bringing up in my life. Like, I have a plan for you, and I plan to use you there. I don't know how, But I donated my licensure for a little bit when I was a stay-at-home mom, and from there he started opening doors, and now I'm overseeing a lot of the programming there. We are a residential facility, so that is a part of what we do. We do provide safe housing, safe adult care, and that's important because around the state, what is considered a safe bed oftentimes is a detention center or the Department of Youth Services, a criminalized child having a bed in one of their facilities or their residential centers. And so we provide that in this space. And while kids are there, they also receive education, credit recovery, comprehensive medical care. We partner with equine therapy, art therapy. We have a lot of different things that are offered. But we also provide work in the community. We have a lot of case managers and counselors that go into people's homes, into the detention centers and the correctional facilities to also reach kids where they're at and to be able to serve and then follow them throughout the state too, because it is a transient population that moves, and having that stable support, a consistent person that is both able to mentor them and also help them with their basic needs is really important. And so we find that to be really effective. The kids that are in our residential facility also receive those same services either before and after they come to our residential center. And then we have a whole education department that goes out as well and does outreach, training for professionals, community members, caregivers. And then they also go into like schools and things like that to train and raise awareness for students as well.
It's easy to fall into describing a lot of what we do in terms of programs, social work, because we do have a lot of social work requirements. We are a foster care home for our residential facility, so we technically are a foster care provider to those kids, and that brings with it just a whole pile of requirements and things that we must do to be okay with the state or federal requirements in that space. It can easily get lost in that conversation how much we believe the gospel matters in this space. We are a Christian ministry first and foremost, not a social work organization. And we see the kids that we serve, apart from Christ, their life will be nothing but tragedy, one tragedy after another, because they've been so damaged and so abused at such an early age. They tend to go into very problematic life directions they never recover from. With Jesus, that can change. And so what we see in the work that we do, it really is life and death. It really is spiritual transformation at the most basic level of kids that, apart from Jesus, they're in a world of hurt. So I just want to emphasize that, when you talk about what we do, and Jen does a great job of that, but I don't want to lose that theme out of it, that we bring Jesus to a lot of hurting kids that if you're not willing to get in the foster care system, if you're not willing to get into and get all those licensures, you can't get access to these kids. And we're not able a bunch of people aside for the opportunity to share the Lord with these kids. There's very few Christians in these spaces. And so it's really critical what we do in the sense of bringing the gospel to the young people we serve.
I think we're always praying through the problem of evil because we're on the front lines of it, seeing it, hearing it. It's one thing for a youth to share their story with you, but they also reenact it and live it out in their responses. We call it fight, flight, freeze, those kinds of things. But typically they're not initially grateful that they've been rescued, that's kind of one of the misconceptions that they're looking for us to prove, that we are the safe adult. They're looking for us to prove that our God is real. They don't say that, but that is the truth. And we hear that from youth who have been with us, who we have walked alongside through that up, down, through really poor choices that for the first time in their life, they're being disciplined in a way that involves grace and accountability. We've had many youth come to Christ after making a really poor decision while they're with us, a decision that in most places would get you kicked out. And instead, we don't just say it's okay, but we hold them accountable and we continue to love them under grace and without judgment in a way that reflects who Christ is. And they're aware that we are a faith-based organization, that we are a team of believers. It's never something that they have to engage in, but it is who we are as a team, and we engage. And in that, the Spirit has done a tremendous amount of work demonstrating who Christ is. We hear from youth who continue to share their story later on that, these were women of faith that loved me, and it would have taken faith to be able to stand up to that evil that's coming out of me, the evil that has happened to me, those kinds of things, which is, it's a testimony to who Christ is and the grit that we can actually persevere with endurance. And the joy of the Lord is what our strength is, not the joy of their reaction to us or, them appreciating who we are in that moment.
I would throw in, I've served in a lot of different spaces in the Youth for Christ ministry through the years. I think the Gracehaven space is the darkest one we've served in. And it's been the one that's been the most consistently difficult. And that difficulty comes from a lot of different directions. At first, you think it's circumstantial. You think it's really just a run of bad luck, just a difficult slog. You could use a lot of phrases. But over time, you begin to realize, no, it's spiritual. When in Job's day did he conclude this wasn't just a run of bad circumstances, but there was actually something spiritual going on behind it? In the same way, after how many years of watching over and over again the kind of oppression, Jen uses the word evil, and I think that's a right and just use of that term. We see evil every day in these kids' lives, and it pours out of them. And so what she described, the beginning place of challenge for Gracehaven is the kids we serve are kids that are both survivors of horrible crimes and they're little criminals. And so you put that together, it's not just that they're eager to be served. They create a lot of tension for our team, and that's hard to manage for anybody, let alone if you're managing it as your job 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. So that's a challenge. I think another challenge has been, and more recently, staffing issues. This kind of work is notorious for being difficult to staff, and when we add the layer that we're only looking for Christian workers to staff it, that cuts out a lot of people who would would apply for roles. And so staffing it with Christians who are mature and able to serve the way we want them to serve is very, very challenging in this environment that we serve in. Another layer that we've been battling is the increased opposition to faith-based groups serving in this space without yielding their faith-based beliefs. And so all the kids we serve, we have to engage or enter into a contract with a county that places that kid with us. So either the courts or a children's services entity that has custody of that child. And 100% of those contracts come to us with language in the contract initially that says you're agreeing that you won't discriminate in hiring based on faith. And based on other elements that we would consider part of our faith, sexuality of our staff, for example. And so just the battle, the ongoing legal battle of trying to persuade entities to remove that language, it would seem like that would be obvious. We have state and federal laws that says we have the right to screen our staff based on faith. Does not mean a local county prosecutor agrees. And so that's been a battle over the last 3 or 4 years that continues to escalate. We are also seeing, interestingly enough, common sense seems to have fled the room in our culture in a lot of ways. And the question of should you have male workers serving as direct care specialists, the people that serve in the homes with girls who have been trafficked by men. When they go to bed at night, there's a guy outside your door that can come into your bedroom. Those kinds of things, just common sense would say you would not want that. But the way our laws are structured, we're by state requirements supposed to hire equally, whether it's a male or female. And the question of what even is a male or a female is under assault. And so how to navigate some of those challenges, because we have pretty much drawn a line that we want to honor the Lord and we want to protect our kids. And so how do we ensure that we have safe females in their residential homes and not other people who may not have the right motives. So those are some of the they're not direct with kids, but they're pressing issues where the culture is washing over our organization and challenging us. How do we navigate this without being hostile to the lost world, and at the same time standing firmly in our faith in Jesus and the implications of that and how we serve?
I think one of the most important things is hope for the kids that we work with. And Christ is a hope that doesn't disappoint. It's the hope that doesn't disappoint. And you can put your hope in many different things, and they have, and they've been disappointed. So when we have that opportunity to introduce them to Christ, there's a stabilizing force there that comes with that. And there's also a hope that doesn't disappoint. And so it doesn't matter how much the mess continues. It is less, and it's an undeniable thing. And for both the staff who get to witness that, as well as for the youth that as they grow up or they go into different parts of the system, they return and share that very thing. And I don't know how you introduce that without Christ. I was actually told to introduce that. It's like the mission statement when I was graduating. Like, now you will go and instill hope. And I was like, that's interesting, because I didn't have a single class here that taught me how to do that in a meaningful way. And we didn't have any classes at that point that talked about how you talk about spirituality and how do you actually introduce hope into somebody's life. So that, I think that is getting to witness that is a privilege, and just seeing that over and over again. It's affirmation for me in my own life, and being able to also affirm that in the lives of the youth that we get to work with.
Yeah, I think it's challenging sometimes because of some of our restrictions. We're covered by HIPAA. We can't talk about the stories. Kids can share their own story when they're old enough, and we can relay that if they're over 18. But a lot of kids don't want to, and we understand and actually support that choice if that's the one that they choose, because it's very difficult to talk about that aspect of your life and want to put that out there for others because of the way people have historically judged that in your resume of life, right? So, but we, on the inside, we hear and see stories year after year of God's transformation that's just astounding. And again, it's when you see a young person coming out of that level of evil, finding Jesus and being transformed. And like with all of us, it's not an overnight transformation, but you know the Lord's there. You see it, and it's tangible in ways that's hard to describe. And it's not the same as someone who has not come from as broken of a background. It's just there's something special about seeing God truly rescue someone from a life of evil that is inspiring and encouraging when you're able to see it. And so I think that's and there's a lot of kids that we've served and a lot of stories that we can't tell. Our staff, I just was with one of our staff that used to work for us about 2 months ago, and she described that very weekend being in the grocery store and her name called out, and this girl comes running across the grocery store in tears, and it was a former Gracehaven girl. And this girl was with her mom out shopping and basically said, through tears, both her and her mom, "You've saved my life. If it wasn't for Gracehaven, I don't think I would even be here today." And those aren't just words. We're dealing with kids. In fact, we've had kids that are with Jesus now that didn't make the transition back into a safe life and are no longer with us. And so we really are working on the front lines with kids that are in scary environments with scary family members and scary friend groups, that if they get pulled back into some of that, it can be really, really tragic. So we are actually watching God transform lives in a profound way on a daily basis. And that's I think, one of the amazing things. Another thing I'll say, this is just a story because I think sometimes when we talk about what we do, working directly with kids is what gets a lot of the visibility. But our education program does a lot of work as well. And they go out and they serve in a lot of different ways, teaching adults how to identify a kid that might be being trafficked that's in your youth group, okay, which is a valuable thing to know. But also talking to kids about how to know if you're being groomed to be trafficked. And we regularly hear stories of kids that are either being groomed or have started to be trafficked that we come across in a school health class where they're doing a program or a training, that we're able to get out of that before they get more deeply into it. But I'm navigating towards a story I do want to share. So a number of years ago, maybe 2017 or 18, our education group was called down to Portsmouth, Ohio to do some training in a school down there. And I won't tell you the whole story just for the sake of time, but the net is she came back terrified. She called me the minute she got back to Columbus, and she was terrified that apparently there was a trafficking ring that included judges, it included people who worked in the courts, that was basically luring young teenage girls that got in any kind of trouble with the law would then be pushed into trafficking through the court system. And that there were people in that community that protected this and had been for years and years and years. There was generations of people that had been trafficked down there, and that everyone was afraid to speak because they thought law enforcement was part of it. And so this community was locked into a structural system that was promoting trafficking with the young girls in that community. And so our worker was scared, partly because she was told several people had tried to stand up and they had disappeared and never been heard from again. And so the assumption was they had been killed. And so she was scared for her life, literally. So we connected with our law enforcement partners, FBI, and our local Columbus Police Task Force people. And long story short, after about 2 years of quiet on the horizon, suddenly, I think it was 2020, there was a big explosion of information coming out of Portsmouth. The Attorney General was involved. There were judges. There were the probation people from the juvenile courts that went to prison over trafficking, and it was confirmed back to us there were actually people that had disappeared that the law enforcement believes were killed trying to keep the secret of what was going on in that community. So even our training and equipping people have been used by God to free an entire community of a really oppressive and sinful evil that was part of their community for a lot of years. So God's used our people, and I mean, you don't expect anything like that would ever happen, right? That just seems like such an outlier of a story. But these are the kinds of things that our team gets drawn into, and it's really, it's to the glory of God that He's using His people to try to rid our community of some of these kinds of evils. When when we started into the conversation about where do you see God at work, I see the Lord, as much as I see oppression and evil, I see God bringing light into that darkness in really profound ways. And our team does that in ways that are super encouraging. So it's like this tension of, yes, it's hard and it feels oppressive and it feels like everything that can go wrong does. And at the same time, God shows up and God does miraculous things. And God uses our team to bring light into darkness in some ways that you think to yourself, well, I didn't sign up for the challenge, but I'm sure glad that I'm part of it because I would sign up every day, all day for the result.
And the result you're only seeing in this life.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly right. And maybe I should add, too, that it's also not a Cinderella result, right? The result, these are real people with real challenges. And so that what we see is we move them from heading down a path of darkness to taking a Y in the road and now they're on a path towards the Lord. It doesn't mean that they still don't have lots of challenges, because they do. And some of them, one of the things about our lives, we think about what Swindoll coined 3 steps forward and 2 steps backward, that concept in the Christian life, right? What we think about, my 2 steps back is, I fell back into getting angry and I yelled at my wife. I don't think my 2 steps back is I fall back into the life of drug use and trafficking, right? So it's this horrifying 2 steps back. But what we see over time is God in the life of a young person draws them to Himself. No matter how challenging their life is, we are able to be used by God to put them on a road towards eternal change and life transformation, and we see it happening in real ways.
I think for me, I continue to see kids who have received Christ while they were with us or while they're in mentoring, go like when they do stumble and perhaps go back to the detention center. They take Christ into that detention center with them. And we have those stories of, this kid came to us for a time. The transporters knew there was something different about us. They recognized something different about the kid as they're transporting him back. And there she is sharing Christ in the detention center or the prison that she had to go back to because her history supports that that's just what part of her life is going to be. But it's changed, and then it's changing the lives of other people. I see them taking that and being a lifelong follower of Christ and taking that hope with them on the road to wherever Christ has them. They don't have to be a product of their circumstances, and they can be in those dark places as well and be a light of hope to other people.
Yeah, I think for me, of course, in what I do, I think about things more structurally and strategically. How are we growing? Where are we headed? I think there's two things that I'm really passionate about, and one of them is we are in a state that sees at least 1,000 kids a year that are identified and pulled out of trafficking. Best estimates, 2,000 to 3,000 kids being trafficked in a given time, but 1,000 a year come out, right? So it's this pipeline of kids coming out, 1,000 a year, 1,000 a year. You think, well, where is the gospel ministry serving those kids? And fortunately, there's a couple that are trying to get traction and get into the space right now. I actually root for them to be successful because there's more kids than we have the capacity to serve. But there are more kids than we have the capacity to serve, and we want to grow that capacity. And so when I think about the next 20 years, the next 10 years, for me, we've got a foothold. We're learning how to do it well. We've been beleaguered over the last couple of years with new unfunded mandates from the federal government and the state and agencies and whatnot. So we've been fighting through that. We're just about we hope, on the other side of new requirements being integrated. And so now we want to get back to the business of getting better at what we do and doing more of it. And I could imagine in the next 5 to 10 years, seeing us move to 400 and 500 kids a year that we could be serving. I'd like to get to at least half this population in that time window because I think that we can. And I think that it does honor the Lord that we're in this space as believers, unapologetic, not willing to yield on our biblical values and bringing the gospel to kids that are in this level of need. I think it's a really sweet testimony to the watching world. So I would like to see us scaling across the state. I'd like to see us open some additional offices. We have one in Toledo right now. We're looking at opening one in Dayton. But I'd like to see 4 or 5 offices around the state that would allow us to serve kids in any corner of the state and really take a swing at, between us and any other believers that are partners in this space, actually having the capacity to serve 1,000 kids a year between all of us. Actually being able to bring the Lord into the life of every kid that gets identified as being trafficked in our state. So that's a big swing, but I believe it's doable. It will take a lot of perseverance and hard work, but I think with the Lord's help, we can get there. The number one thing we're always looking for is people willing to invest in the life of a kid, right? And that can be as a volunteer, as a mentor, as a house mom, as a volunteer person who goes out and does education on our behalf. So that's a way that's really tangible and it's really meaningful. People can give dollars to support what we do. Obviously, that's always a need. There's ways to do that through things like our Over the Edge event coming up, where people raise money and raise awareness for our cause. But there's dollars, there's time investment, there's people who might be willing to give a piece of their career to us and journey with us as one of our direct care workers that can serve kids in this space. We're always on the lookout for people who are followers of Jesus that are willing to serve in this space. And then there's broader ways of being advocates in the community for the need, for the ministry that reaches in and serves that need. So those are some things that jump to my mind. Jen, you might have some more practical ways to say some of that.
Yeah, even just being able to open your home up as like a foster family. A lot of the youth we serve do not have someone to return to, and it is one of the things that undermines their progress and healing to not have someone in your corner. So we know that like having an adult mentor, so we have a mentoring program, being willing to mentor one kid will change that kid's life. being able to invite them into your home. And some of our kids age out of the system without a permanent, we call it permanency, but a permanent place to call home. So we call them host homes, but adults who are willing to bring, or families who are willing to bring an adult youth into their home and have somewhere to go for a meal, Christmas, when my car breaks down, who do I call? Those kinds of things. Like we've seen a huge difference in the lives of kids who have had that. And that's not something we formally do as an agency, but it is something that we've seen the church do, and church members of various churches step up in that space when there's a need, and it's been very helpful in that space. You mentioned volunteering. We do have a tremendous amount of volunteers, and we can't do this work without them. They come in and they are the life skills support at the group home. They make the meal. They are there for a hard conversation or just to sit while this youth is trying to grapple with what has happened to them, to play with them, to have a field day and play volleyball and allow them to be a kid and be a kid with them, teach them how to play, those kinds of things. Our tutors are really important as well, having one-on-one support during their education, because a lot of these kids haven't had education for years. They've been on the streets, or if they have, they're really far behind because a traumatized brain has a really hard time learning in the traditional classroom. So having that additional support is really key. And those are ways people can come alongside us and volunteer, as well as for our larger events like Over the Edge. We have Over the Edge coming up in June. It's June 14th. And there are ways to volunteer or to even go over the edge, raise awareness and fundraising for our organization, and participate by taking the plunge over the edge. Over the Edge, it's a rappelling event. We do this off of the Chase building downtown, and people rappel off of the building. They've raised a certain dollar amount to be able to do that, and it's a really great time. There's a lot of people who are both there and walking by because it's in the center of downtown. How long have we been doing this? Is it nine years?
Something like that, 8 or 9 years, yeah.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's a blast to do. It's a blast to do for people who like to rappel. It's terrifying for others, but we still have people that have done it just because they believe in the cause, right? We actually had a gal that went over the edge in a wheelchair a couple years back. And they had to set up a whole rig to be able to help her lower herself down in a wheelchair. And we've had Brutus Buckeye go over the edge. So it's kind of a fun and party environment. But really, it is one of the premier ways we raise awareness in our city. I mean, we're at the corner of 3rd and Broad Street, right, in the middle of the day. So there's a lot of people to drive by, see the signage, and hear about it in the media. And it helps people recognize this is a real thing that is really happening in our community. So it's pretty cool. And it's a fun day for people who like to rappel. And if you're terrified, I am not, I'm able to do heights, but I'm not very excited about doing heights. So they persuaded me to do it, and I have, but I don't relish the next opportunity to do it again, right? So some of us are like that, but either way, it's all been fun and helpful to the mission that we've been given. I have a scripture. It's kind of an odd one. Jesus makes the comment in John. He says, work while it's day because the night's coming when no man can work. And I see a lot of the cultural directions around this space making our ability to serve these kids tenuous. And I don't know how long before we will be boxed out based on the fact that we're a Christian ministry. And it may not happen. That's a per point, though. It's not a, 10, 15, 20 years ago, I would do strategic plans for Youth for Christ. We would always do what's called a SWOT analysis, strengths, weakness, opportunities, threats. And we would put on our threat list that the government might come in and do something, but at the time, we really had no clue what that might be on any given day that would have any impact on what we did day to day, right? Today, what the government might do on any given day is something I actually look into my news feed and check on, because things are happening on a daily and weekly basis that actually affect our work. And there are people that would intentionally want to see Christians out of these kinds of spaces, and others that champion that we should and need to stay in them. And so there is a struggle going on, and I feel like for me, and this is where I sit organizationally, I'm concerned about these kinds of issues day to day. How does God help continue to allow us to serve in this space with His miraculous help in the face of a lot of challenges that keep getting, roadblocks that keep getting thrown in? And they are legal. They are people in the government and at various levels who are hostile to who we are because of our faith and our willingness to stick that faith and not yield on it. So for me, when I read that, Jesus meant something different in the time that He spoke it to the situation that He was in, but it just reminds me that there's a lot of darkness, and that ebbs and flows in a given culture or society, and we're in a dark space that is becoming increasingly hostile to who we are. So doing what we can and being as good at it as we can to try to retain our witness as long as we can is something that I think about a lot, actually, and I pray over a lot.
There's a lot of scriptures, but the book of Hosea is always one that I think about in terms of just what great lengths God went to demonstrate His love to someone who is rebellious and isn't saying thank you, and in all intents and purposes wasn't deserving of that love. And that's something that always stands out to me. I think about in Romans 2, there's the description of the hope that doesn't disappoint, and being able to cling to that. Those are regularly things I will go back to remind myself when it's hard, and that our strength doesn't come from the picture perfect situation. It's going to come from the Lord, and having joy in what it is that He is doing, having joy in seeing what great lengths He goes to find people, and how He loves through us too, because we're imperfect, and He does a lot through our imperfections when we submit that to Him.
Well, Jen, Scott, thank you guys for coming on and sharing what's going on in the Gracehaven Ministry. For more information on the Dwell in These Things podcast, you can visit dwellcc.org. For more information on Gracehaven or to sign up for the Over the Edge event happening on June 14th, you can visit www.gracehaven.me.